May 10, 1941, 11:47 p.m. London, Cabinet War Rooms. The lights flicker beneath Whitehall. Dust drifts from the ceiling with every distant odor of German bombs. A clerk's hand tightens around a pencil, knuckles pale. Somewhere above, glass shatters. Then, silence. Not relief. Waiting. Winston Churchill stands at the long map table, cigar unlit between his fingers. The red pins marking British positions stretch thin, from the Atlantic to North Africa, from the skies over London to the sea lanes choking with U-boats. Britain is exhausted. The Luftwaffe has pounded the capital for 8 months. The Royal Navy is stretched. The Army is still rebuilding after Dunkirk. And across the Atlantic, the most powerful industrial nation on earth remains officially at peace. Then, a telephone rings. It is not Washington. This is the moment the title promises. Not a battlefield charge, not a declaration of war, but a night when words, carefully chosen, deliberately restrained, carry the weight of survival. What Churchill said in 1941 about America entering World War II mattered because Britain could not win alone, and because the United States, still neutral, would shape the outcome of the war long before it formally entered it. The cause was Britain's isolation. The impact would be global, industrial, strategic, irreversible. Churchill knows the numbers even if he refuses to say them aloud. German forces dominate Europe. The Soviet Union is still bound to Hitler by the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Japan watches from the Pacific. And Franklin D. Roosevelt, sympathetic but constrained, faces a divided Congress and a public wary of another European war. Churchill exhales slowly. He does not ask for American blood. Not yet. In 1941, he understands something crucial. If he pushes too hard, America may pull away. If he says too little, Britain may collapse. Weeks earlier, in the House of Commons, he chose his words with surgical care. He spoke of all aid short of war. He praised American resolve without demanding American sacrifice. He framed Britain not as a desperate ally, but as a forward defense of American security. Now underground, another report arrives. German bombers are turning back. For tonight, London holds. But holding is no longer enough. Across the Atlantic, American factories are waking to wartime production. Lend-Lease, still controversial, still fragile, is beginning to flow. Destroyers for bases. Convoys inching eastward under the Atlantic's gray skies. The war is already becoming American in everything but name. Then the map officer shifts a pin. A quiet movement. Strategic. The Atlantic lifeline tightens. Churchill finally lights the cigar. The smoke curls upward, trapped by concrete and steel. America has not entered the war. But in 1941, because of what Churchill says, and how he says it, the war is already entering America. Then the room goes still again, and the waiting resumes. Early morning, 10, Downing Street. The city above is gray with smoke and drizzle. Inside number 10, the war is quieter, but no less dangerous. Papers are spread across Churchill's desk, drafts crossed through in thick ink, sentences rewritten, then rewritten again. Every word is weighed, not for poetry, but for consequence. In 1941, Churchill understands that speeches are not performances, they are instruments, and America is listening. He dictates carefully, not demands, never ultimatums. He speaks instead of shared destiny, shared language, shared oceans. He frames Britain's fight as America's future. Germany, he warns, is not merely conquering Europe, it is reorganizing the world. And if Britain falls, the Atlantic will no longer be a barrier. It will be a highway. This is the strategic shift. Churchill is no longer speaking only to Parliament. He is speaking through Parliament to the United States. Then comes the interruption. A courier enters with a message marked Washington. Not a declaration, not even a promise, but approval, narrow, conditional, for expanded Lend-Lease shipments, aircraft, trucks, ammunition, supplies that will not fire themselves but will keep Britain alive long enough to matter. Churchill nods once. He does not celebrate, because he knows how fragile this is. Across the ocean, isolationists are watching his words as closely as interventionists. Every phrase that sounds like pleading risks backlash. Every hint of expectation risks resistance. So Churchill does something unusual for a wartime leader. He limits himself. In public, he avoids naming America's entry as inevitable. He refuses to predict when the United States will fight. Instead, he praises what America is already doing, without asking for more. He calls Roosevelt a friend of freedom, not an ally in arms. The distinction matters. Then the radio crackles. A BBC broadcast carries his voice beyond Britain to New York apartments, Midwest farmhouses, West Coast ports. Calm, controlled, defiant but not desperate. He speaks of endurance, of time, of holding the line. And then the sentence that lands hardest, not in London, but in Washington. "Give us the tools," Churchill says, "and we will finish the job." It is not a request for troops, it is an offer of partnership. Strategically, the effect is immediate. American public opinion shifts, not toward war, but toward responsibility. Britain is no longer seen as a lost cause. It is seen as a shield, a barrier buying time. Then comes the pattern break. Behind closed doors, Churchill tells his inner circle something very different. He does not believe Britain can finish the job alone. He believes America will enter the war, but only when pushed by events, not words. So in 1941, Churchill sharpens his most important weapon, patience, and waits for history to move. Midday, Washington, D.C. The Potomac moves slowly under a pale sky. Inside the White House, the war feels distant, measured in memos, votes, and public opinion polls. President Franklin D. Roosevelt sits at his desk, glasses low on his nose, reading the latest cable from London. Churchill's words are there again, careful, respectful, never crossing the line. Outside these walls, America is not at war. In 1941, that fact governs everything. Congress remains divided. The Neutrality Act still casts long shadows. In the Midwest, rallies denounce foreign wars. Newspapers debate whether Britain can even survive. Roosevelt may sympathize deeply with Churchill, but he cannot outrun the country he governs. And Churchill knows it. That is why, when he speaks of America entering World War II, he does so indirectly, almost obliquely. He talks about ocean shrinking, about air power erasing distance, about what happens if the Atlantic becomes hostile. He never says when, he never says how, and crucially, he never says must. Then the silence stretches. Weeks pass. Convoys cross the Atlantic under the protection of the U.S. Navy, officially neutral, unofficially engaged. German U-boats stalk the sea lanes. Reports come in of close encounters, near misses. Torpedoes fired but not confirmed. Each incident threatens to force Roosevelt's hand, but not yet. This is the strategic tension at the heart of 1941. Britain needs America fully in the war. America is already halfway there, but cannot admit it. And Churchill's language is the bridge holding that contradiction together. Then comes the break in rhythm. A cabinet meeting in Washington turns sharp. Advisors argue whether escorting convoys constitutes an act of war. The word incident is used instead of attack. Language once again controls reality. Back in London, Churchill receives summaries of these debates. He reads them late at night, alone. He understands something vital. American entry will not come from persuasion alone. It will come from collision. Still, he does not rush it. He continues to praise American restraint, continues to speak of shared values rather than shared enemies. In one address, he calls the United States the arsenal of democracy, a phrase that travels faster than any battleship. The impact is subtle but decisive. Factories expand. Shipyards work around the clock. American industry begins to outpace German production, not for itself, but for Britain. Then the radio reports another Atlantic encounter. Shots fired. No casualties. Officially, nothing has changed. Unofficially, everything has. Churchill closes the report and says nothing. Because in 1941, silence, across the Atlantic, is not absence. It is pressure building. Late afternoon, London. Rain taps against the windows of the Foreign Office. The war outside is loud, but diplomacy moves in murmurs. Churchill meets with Anthony Eden. Papers spread between them. Telegrams from Washington. Summaries of conversations that never quite say what they mean. In 1941, Churchill's public words about America entering the war are careful, but in private, the message sharpens. He speaks of inevitability, not certainty, but direction. The Atlantic Charter is still months away, but its foundations are already forming. Britain and the United States are aligning their war aims without formally sharing a war. Freedom of the seas, self-determination, a post-war order that assumes Axis defeat without stating who will deliver it. This is the quiet promise. Churchill knows Roosevelt cannot declare war, so he offers something else, a shared future that only makes sense if America eventually fights. Then the strategic beat lands. In August 1941, off the coast of Newfoundland, Churchill and Roosevelt meet aboard HMS Prince of Wales. Officially, it is not a war conference. Officially, it is not an alliance. But the sea is calm, and the distance between words and actions narrows. Churchill is careful even here. He does not ask Roosevelt for a timetable. He does not press for commitments. Instead, he speaks of moral clarity, of what the war means, not just for Europe, but for the world that will follow. Roosevelt listens. Back in London, Churchill reports to Parliament with restraint. He does not announce American entry. He does not hint at secret promises. He speaks instead of understanding, of cooperation, of resolve. The public hears reassurance. The Germans hear something else. Berlin intelligence intercepts Churchill's speeches and dismisses them as bluff. America, they believe, will remain neutral. Britain, they believe, is posturing. That miscalculation matters. Because behind the scenes, American naval patrols expand. British planners begin assuming American material support as a constant. The war's logistics, fuel, steel, shipping, quietly rebalance. Then the interruption. A report arrives of another U-boat engagement involving U.S. vessels. Again, no declaration. Again, no retreat. Churchill reads the report and understands the narrowing path. In 1941, what he says about America entering the war is not a prediction. It is preparation. He is shaping a moment that will not come by invitation, but by force. And when it does, the world will already be moving in American time. Nightfall, checkers. The countryside is dark, blackout curtains drawn tight against the windows. Wind moves through the trees, carrying no aircraft this time, no sirens. For the first time in days, Churchill is away from London, but the war follows him here. He sits alone with a glass untouched, papers stacked neatly at the edge of the table. Reports from the Atlantic, intelligence summaries from Berlin, estimates that refuse to stabilize. Waiting has become a form of command, and it is heavier than action. In 1941, Churchill's greatest strain is not fighting Germany. It is holding Britain together while America decides. Publicly, he continues to speak with confidence. He tells Parliament that Britain will endure whatever the cost may be. He praises American material support without implying obligation. His tone never wavers. Privately, the calculus is brutal. British gold. Reserves are nearly exhausted. Merchant losses remain high despite convoy systems. The army can defend the island, but offensive operations are limited. Time favors Germany unless something changes. That something is America. Yet Churchill cannot force it. Then comes the strategic constraint. If Britain appears too weak, American support could falter. If Britain appears too dependent, isolationists gain ground. Churchill must project strength without claiming sufficiency, resolve without closure. The radio crackles softly in the corner of the room. News from the Eastern Front. Germany has invaded the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa has begun. The map of the war shifts violently east. Churchill closes his eyes for a moment. This changes everything. The United States now sees a world war in full motion. Germany is no longer merely a European problem, and Churchill adjusts instantly. His language sharpens, not toward America, but toward time. He speaks of a long war, of endurance measured in years, not months. Another report arrives. American destroyers are escorting convoys deeper into the Atlantic. The line between neutrality and war grows thinner by the week. Then, the interruption. A naval attaché's note warns that one serious incident, one American ship sunk with lives lost, could collapse restraint overnight. Churchill understands the risk. He does not seek that incident, but he no longer fears it. The waiting has become unbearable because the path is narrowing. Options are closing. Initiative is shifting away from diplomacy and toward fate. Late that night, Churchill dictates a brief message, not a demand, not a warning, a statement of belief that the forces now aligned against tyranny cannot ultimately be separated by law or geography. It is meant for the future. In 1941, what Churchill says about America entering the war is less about persuasion than positioning. Britain is bracing for impact, not invitation. And the night grows. Quieter still. Early morning. Atlantic Ocean. Gray water heaves under a low sky. A U.S. Navy destroyer cuts through the swell, its wake foaming white. Sailors stand watch, coats pulled tight against the wind. Officially, they are not at war. Unofficially, they are hunting. In the months after Churchill's careful words, the Atlantic becomes the proving ground. Convoys tighten. Escorts push farther east. German U-boats respond aggressively. The space between peace and war narrows to a matter of definition. Churchill follows every report. He no longer speaks publicly about if America will enter the war. He speaks instead about when the free nations stand together. The phrasing is deliberate. The timing is not his to choose. Then the strategic break comes. In October 1941, the destroyer USS Reuben James is torpedoed and sunk while escorting a convoy near Iceland. American sailors die. The news crosses the Atlantic in hours. In London, Churchill receives the report without expression. He says nothing publicly that day. No triumph, no pressure, only condolences. But the meaning is unmistakable. America has crossed a line, without crossing it fully. Roosevelt addresses the nation with controlled anger. He condemns German aggression. He orders more assertive naval action. Still, no declaration. Still, restraint holds. Churchill understands the danger now is not delay, but misstep. One careless word could turn sympathy into suspicion. One overt push could fracture American unity. So he waits again. In speeches, he honors American sailors as defenders of freedom, without calling them combatants. He frames the Atlantic as a shared responsibility. He allows the facts to speak. Behind the scenes, British and American planners coordinate more closely than ever. Shipping schedules align. Intelligence is exchanged. War planning begins in all but name. Then the pattern interrupts once more. Reports arrive from the Pacific. Japanese movements, diplomatic tensions, signals that the axis of war is widening beyond Europe. Churchill reads them carefully. He knows the door to American entry will not open from the Atlantic alone. It will open from the world. By late 1941, what Churchill has said, and restrained himself from saying, has done its work. Britain has survived the waiting. America is armed, mobilized, and psychologically prepared. All that remains is the moment, and that moment is no longer in his control. Morning, London. The city wakes under low cloud. Church bells sound cautiously, as if unsure whether to ring at all. Churchill stands near a window reading a cable just delivered from Washington. The words are measured, diplomatic. But the tension beneath them is unmistakable. In 1941, before Pearl Harbor, Churchill already knows the outcome, if not the date. He knows America will enter the war not because of persuasion, but because the war will find America. His task all year long has been to ensure that when that moment comes, Britain is still standing and the alliance is ready. He does not speak publicly of inevitability. He never says, America must fight. Instead, he speaks of common cause, of history moving toward its own conclusions. He allows Americans to believe the decision will be theirs alone. That restraint is the final strategic victory. Then, the world changes. News arrives from the Pacific. Japanese aircraft have attacked the U.S. fleet at Pearl Harbor. The report is confused at first, fragmentary, incomplete, but the meaning is clear. America is at war. Churchill does not hesitate. He turns to his staff and dictates a message to Roosevelt, brief, direct, unambiguous. Britain stands with the United States. There is no negotiation now, no waiting. Later, he will tell Parliament that he slept the sleep of the saved and thankful. But that relief is earned, because by December 1941, everything Churchill has said and withheld has shaped the battlefield America is about to enter. The United States does not arrive unprepared. Its factories are already mobilized. Its navy is already engaged. Its public has already been moved from isolation to resolve. That is the impact. What Churchill said in 1941 about America entering World War II mattered not because it forced action, but because it guided it. He transformed neutrality into involvement, involvement into commitment, commitment into alliance. He understood the limits of words and their power. As American troops begin to mobilize as ships turn toward Europe, the war enters a new phase. Britain is no longer alone. The balance shifts. Time, at last, changes sides. Churchill steps away from the window. Outside, London continues, scarred, standing, unbroken. The waiting is over. The war is now global, and the words spoken in 1941 have done exactly what they were meant to do.